One of the wonderful things about Asp Net Core is that when it comes time to deploy, you have many different options. If you do a search for Asp Net Core Nginx, you should find a link to this page, which is how to host Asp Net Core on Linux with Nginx. So if you're in a Linux environment, now that you know how to publish an application, you can take that published output, combine it with this documentation, and figure out how to get your application up and running with Nginx. You can also search for Asp Net Core and Apache. Apache, another popular option on Linux, and this documentation will walk you through how to configure Apache to host your Asp Net Core application. What I want to do in this course is show you how to host Asp Net Core on Windows with IIS. It is, fortunately, a simple operation, and we're also going to get our application running with a SQL database that is not the same as the local DB that we're using for development. Now, one caveat about IIS deployments. Even though we have created a self-contained application that includes an entire runtime deployment so that we don't have to depend on any other bits at runtime, there is still a component that you need to install on a server for IIS to execute Asp Net Core. The download for that component is known as the .NET Core Hosting Bundle. You can see there's a link right here at the top of this article for hosting Asp Net Core on Windows with IIS. And what will happen when you follow the links is you will eventually download an MSI installer that will install something known as the Asp.NET Core module. Sometimes you'll see that referred to as just ANCM, Asp.NET Core module. The Asp.NET Core module, as the name implies, is a module that plugs into the IIS processing pipeline and facilitates the hosting of an Asp.NET Core application with IIS. I also want to point out that I am using Asp.NET Core 2.1, and with Asp.NET Core 2.1, I do need the Asp.NET Core module installed. And this module is going to allow me to do what's known as out-of-process hosting. Coming up in future versions of Asp.NET, we'll be able to use this Asp.NET Core module and do in-process hosting so that my application code is actually running inside of the worker process for IIS, and that can lead to some performance benefits. It's really a configuration change to move between out-of-process and in-process. I'm going to show you the basic steps that you can use with IIS to get up and running with Asp.NET Core in general. And by the way, again, if you want to deploy to Azure, my Azure Getting Started for .NET developers will show you exactly what to do for an Asp.NET Core project. But with that being said, I do want to make one small change to the project itself that's going to make this a little bit easier to deploy. I'm going to come into startup.cs, and temporarily what I want to do is remove the use of an actual SQL Server database. We will add this functionality back in later, but just to get the site up and running, I want to comment out this line of code that says use the SQL Restaurant Data Service for anything that needs an iRestaurant data interface. And I'm going to replace that and say that we want to use in-memory restaurant data with any component that needs iRestaurant data. So you might remember at the beginning of the course, in-memory restaurant data did not access a database, it accessed a list that was held in memory. This means we're cutting out the database access temporarily, and we're just going to focus on getting the site up and running in IIS and then turn on the SQL database. So with that change in place, let me come back out to the command line. What I want to do is just one more time do a .NET publish with these latest bits, these latest changes, and while that is happening, I'm going to flip over to the IIS Manager. Let me bring this window over here onto the screen where I am recording, and first of all, I'm going to click on the server, and I'm going to go to the modules section. And by the way, this demo is going to move relatively fast. It will feel very fast if you haven't done a lot of work with IIS in the past, but I'm really trying to avoid talking about IIS in detail. There's lots of other Pluralsight courses that go into IIS for developers and IT admins. What I want to do is just focus on this deployment. But I will show you, if you come into the server and you go to the modules section, I can open this up and I just want to verify that I do have that Asp.NET Core hosting bundle installed. I can be sure that is installed if I have the Asp Net Core module version 2 installed as a module here at the server level. That is in place, so we are good. Next, what I'm going to do is go to our list of sites. Currently, we have a default website in place, but I want Ode to Food to be a new site that is a part of this server, so I'm going to add a website. Let's give the site the name of Ode to Food, and the physical path will be the path to our published output. So I'm going to enter in ctemp /ode to food. Of course, in production, you'll want to make sure that that folder has the proper ACLs and it's a bit locked down. But again, all of that is covered in other courses. And also, I'm going to bind this to an HTTPS port, the default HTTPS port, which is port 443. And to access the site, we're just going to be using localhost. Because I want to use HTTPS, I must select an SSL certificate to use. Now this will be a bit unorthodox and something you would never do for a production website, but as long as I'm just running locally, I can select the IIS Express Development Certificate that is already installed on this machine. And that certificate is going to work well because it's already trusted and set up well to work with localhost. You won't be able to access this website remotely and have a trust relationship with this server. But again, I don't want to go into the details of how to create and install SSL certificates. Those topics are already covered well in other courses here on Pluralsight. With these settings in place, I'm going to say yes, go ahead and start the website immediately. We're going to press OK. And now let's come over into a browser. And what I want to do is go to HTTPS and then localhost without the port number because it's going to be the default port number. And I have my application running. So deployment to IIS is very simple. All I need to do is take my published output and point a website to that published output. Once I have the ASP.NET Core hosting bundle installed, everything's going to be relatively smooth. But before we declare this a complete success, we still need to get a database up and running. And before I get the database up and running, I also want to show you something that is happening behind the scenes with IIS and ASP.NET Core.